Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai. Welcome to our 5th New Zealand Marine Science Society webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the topic Tauranga Māori in our Moana, which is a really interesting topic. So I'm super excited to hear what some of our New Zealand researchers have to talk to us today about. Before I get into it though, of course we must start with some housekeeping as per the general process. For those of you that aren't yet a member of the New Zealand Marine Science Society, please head to our website. It's super quick and easy to do. It's cheap, it only costs $69 per annum for a professional member and $23 per annum for a student. So head to the website, join the society. We really do rely on the membership to keep our society going. In addition, for students, it also gives you access to a whole lot of really useful grants that you can apply for to help facilitate your research or even to fund international travel to conferences when travel's allowed again, hopefully next year, but we'll see. All right, so today we've got 4 really awesome speakers that all happen to come from the University of Waikato. As per usual, we're going to go through speaker by speaker. At the end of each speaker's presentation, please do ask them questions via the chat box that's in the bottom of your screen. You can just type those questions out over the course of their presentation and then I'll relay those to each speaker. Each speaker will talk for around 10 or so minutes, followed by about 3 minutes of question time. So please do make use of that question time. Our 4 speakers today are Rangihurihia McDonald. The second one is Kimberly Maxwell. The third is Kura Paul-Burke. And then finally, we'll end with Phil Ross. So our first speaker today, Rangihuda Mcdonald, is a doctoral student at the Faculty of Maori and Indigenous Studies at the University of Waikato. She is passionate about Tauranga Māori, as well as being an avid waka enthusiast. Her PhD aims to bring together traditional and contemporary knowledge around waka and navigation to better understand our changing marine environment. Now, her research is part of the He Papa Moana component of the Moana Project. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Rangihurihia. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Kei ngā maunga whakahi o te motu, kei ngā wai whakatere taniwha, kia koutou ngā kairangahau, ngā kaipūtaiao, otira ngā kaitiaki o tō tātou moana, tēnā koutou, huri noa, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, and thanks for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and talk through my PhD topic with you all. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm a PhD student at the University of Waikato, and this presentation is just going to give a brief overview of my topic, as I am about 1 year into the project so far. So I'm just going to launch straight into it. So I thought I'd post up my research questions to give you a bit of an idea of exactly what I'm trying to find out. So firstly, what are the impacts of climate change on waka voyaging? And secondly, how can we draw on waka voyaging knowledge to respond to climate change? So my interest in this kaupapa is a matter of whakapapa, really. That is my whakapapa to the moana, to coastal places and people, and to ancestors who I would deem the greatest seafarers and navigators on Earth. And the photo you can see here, the map, I should say, is a stretch of coastline just south of the Kawhia Harbour on the west coast of the North Island of Aotearoa. And the map shows some of the communities that I belong to. And I wanted to mention my marae at Marokopa, which is pictured here. Unique in that I believe it's one of the only marae in the country that is only accessible by boat. But this too leaves it vulnerable to climate change threats. And in recent years, our whānau at Marokopa have been grappling with sea level rise and coastal erosion. And in certain conditions, we have water coming right up onto our marae ātea. And we think it's only going to be a matter of time before our entire marae complex, the whenua surrounding the marae and urupā, could be completely underwater. So it's things like this that interest me, that see me on this path in my PhD project, and also my background in waka, paddling waka, and my introduction to sailing waka as well, the waka haurua, which has become the focus of my PhD research. So this photo here is taken from a recent voyage in about 2011, known as Te Mano Te Moana, which was a Pacific-wide voyage of 7 different modern-day waka haurua, and the key aim of this voyage was to raise awareness of climate change and risks to our ocean. And so the waka haurua that you see here are replica models of the traditional watercraft used by our ancestors, our Polynesian ancestors, to explore and discover almost every island in the entire Pacific Ocean, and settle many of these islands, later to arrive here in Aotearoa on waka, very much like these ones you see pictured here. And alongside this technological advancement, which was the waka haurua of the time, they developed a sophisticated navigational knowledge using only the natural environment, the rising and setting points of certain stars, birds, winds, currents, and yeah, their roadmap was the natural environment. Their compass was the natural environment. And on arrival to Aotearoa, long distance voyaging declined, and we didn't see it for hundreds of years. And it's only been the last 20 to 30 years that we've seen this renaissance, this recovering of sailing and voyaging knowledge, and even the construction of these types of canoes. And since then, through this recovering of traditional navigational methods in particular, the waka voyaging community have recognised threats to our oceans in the form of climate change, ocean degradation, plastic pollution and what have you, and have responded to these threats in a number of ways. And this small timeline that you see here are some of the measures that the waka voyaging community throughout the Pacific, some of the ways in which they have responded to climate change and to various threats in our oceans. So as I mentioned, I'm about a year into my project, and so I thought I'd briefly give some key kind of things that are starting to emerge from the literature so far. So in terms of climate change impacts on voyaging, in terms of contemporary scholarly literature around our modern waka haurua, there's very little written about it and the relationship with climate change. But I guess what has come up so far is climate change, as we probably know, caused by human activity, rooted in capitalist regimes of extraction and profit. For Māori and Indigenous peoples, climate change is being described as a threat multiplier, having the ability to exacerbate existing social issues. In terms of voyaging, while there is little written about it, it's quite clear that it is a very climate sensitive activity. And I found examples from prehistoric voyaging prior to our ancestors arriving here of various climate patterns that either encouraged or discouraged long distance voyaging throughout the Pacific. So some examples were the Little Ice Age and the Little Climate Optimum, which either encouraged or discouraged voyaging, long distance voyaging. And so with that knowledge, it's my assertion that modern anthropogenic climate change too will have significant impacts on the traditional methods of navigation, of the practice of voyaging itself, and of course on Māori communities. In terms of Mataron responses to climate change, I've spoken briefly of some of the initiatives that the waka voyaging communities have made in response to climate change. But through the literature, there's an overwhelming sort of theme of kaitiakitanga, the ethic of conservation and sustainability, which is coming through very strongly. And I think what's key to this was a worldview built on whakapapa, or genealogical connections with the natural world, with the environment, with the ocean, and embodied through tikanga practices, rituals, processes that that showed this connection with the environment. And most of the literature is calling Maori and Indigenous literature, in particular, is calling for a cultural climate change. So a genuine reconnection with the environment, raising environmental consciousness. And I suggest that through mātauranga Māori and Indigenous knowledge, we can, there's keys within that mātauranga to enable this. So I wanted to end with a quote. I think this quote provides some hope for the future and suggests also that there is much to learn from our traditional Maori marine knowledge and voyaging knowledge when it comes to restoring the health of our oceans. And the quote goes like this. It's from one of the crew members of Hokulea, which is one of the Hawaiian canoes, wakahaurua. The canoe is a poetic, powerful metaphor of planet Earth, reminding us that we are an island of finite resources, floating in the sea of space. As she voyages, the canoe embodies balance, harmony, teamwork, and respect. If one of her hulls is damaged, we take actions to repair it and prevent sinking. So too is our responsibility for the Earth, to care for our home as though the planet is on loan to us from future generations. The canoe is filled with ancient whisperings, as though a channel to ancestral wisdom. The canoe calls for a new vision, a new sail plan for island Earth, drawing on the ancient island wisdom of sustainability to guide us. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa.
Oh, awesome. That was super interesting. Thank you for telling us about that research. A few questions from the audience. Well, one's actually from me. In the 2018 Waka cruise that you mentioned at the start, the Te Mato Maui, the microplastic one, can you tell me just a little bit more about that Waka cruise and what they did on it?
Yeah, so I believe that Te Mataua Maui is based in the Hawke's Bay, I believe, and it was a part of the New Zealand Pure Tour, and the Pure is actually an acronym for, you're testing me here. It's something, I think the P was stood for plastics, but I can't quite remember what the other letters stood for. But they were going down to Wellington for, what was it called? It was a big festival down in Wellington. And so they had scientists aboard, and they sailed down from the Hawke's Bay down to Wellington and had these trawls, these sort of microplastic trawls, which were specifically designed for waka to be trawled from the back of a waka, where they were collecting microplastics, and that was going to, I think, the University of Canterbury, if I remember correctly, to look into and whatever happened from there. So yeah, and I think they'd identified that the waka travelled at the perfect speed to be able to trawl for these microplastics. So there's a few news articles and things that documented this. So really
super cool. It is interesting. And one more question. at the end of your talk, you showed a waka from Hawaii. How collaborative is it between the Pacific Islands, for example, and New Zealand to do these sorts of wide-scale waka journeys, looking at the environment?
Yeah, I think I think the waka community, so at the start of my research, I wanted to just focus on Aotearoa, but I think it's so interconnected that you can't not sort of look at the community as one community across the Pacific. So here in Aotearoa, we've been able to recover sort of navigational knowledge through people like Nainoa Thompson and Mo Piailu from Satawal and Micronesia. So there is this, it's really interconnected. And even the image I showed in, I think, the third slide of the 7 waka, they came from, one from here in Aotearoa, Samoa, Tahiti. So like we see them go in fleets of waka. So
that's awesome. It seems like it's a good opportunity for a wide-scale collaboration between island nations in the South Pacific. I've got one more question here. Is there a plan yet for your marae, and how will it respond to rising sea level?
Yeah, exactly. So our marae is currently closed, and I think it has been since COVID. But I think it's still up in the air. So where our marae currently sits, I think maybe 80 or so years ago, or maybe a bit more than that, it was actually in a slightly different place, a little further along the river. So it's not the first time that our marae has been moved. So I think at this point, that's probably the most likely option. Of course, there's measures like they do coastal plantings and things throughout the year to stop the erosion and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think the long-term kind of plan is possibly having to move it. And it's, that's difficult, but we also have that example of our marae having been moved previously. So it's not totally out of the question, I guess. Yeah, but we can't stop the water kind of thing. I think there've been kind of sort of, ideas, could we do a floating marae or all these kinds of ideas, but we'll just
it's pretty frightening when you can see first-hand evidence of sea level rise on a local scale in your backyard, literally in your backyard.
Exactly.
It really makes you aware of the plight faced by people in Tuvalu, for example, or other island nations as well, that this is a very serious threat to them, sea level rise. I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much. That was super awesome. And I will hand over to our next speaker, which is Kimberly Maxwell, who is a postdoctoral research fellow, also at the University of Waikato. And she is currently working on the MB-funded Moana Project Fakatori case study. Now, Kimberly has experience in aquaculture research techniques, conducting customary fish and shellfish fishery surveys, benthic ecology, oral histories, Maturana Maori, and studying New Zealand fisheries management. Today, Kimberly is going to talk to us about mussels at every occasion, Fakatori rohi moana planning. Welcome, Kimberly.
Kia ora. Can you see that all right? Just going to time myself. Tēnā koutou katoa, tātou ko hui hui mai I tēnei ahi. Zui ki te whakarongo ki a tātou e kōrero ana ki rungi I tēnei kaupapa te mātauranga o tō tātou moana. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today, and thank you everyone for listening. Ko ai tēnei e kōrero ana, ko maki o te maunga, ko waiawa te awa, ko Ngāti Patu Moana te hapu, ko whakatohia te iwi, ko mokomoko te tangata, ko mātātua te waka. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kimberley Maxwell aho. He uri hoki tēnei no te whana apanui, Ngāti Porou, Ngaitai, me Ngā Titu Wharetoa. Ti hei Mauri ora. I'm a postdoc at Waikato University and Māori marine researcher because I span a lot of different disciplines now, and I work for Māori, with Māori, as a Māori in my mahi, and I'm based in New Plymouth where my family is. Today I'm going to talk about the Moana Project and how the postdoc on the Fakatori case study fits within that, and then delve into our tauranga in the form of a pātere and explore the tauranga within it, within the pātere, and how this is leading our planning, and then just talk about some considerations for Māori GIS mapping. And I want to acknowledge Maui Hudson, who's our team leader for He Papa Moana, also whakapapa to Fakatoria, and Deni Paruru, based at Fakatoria Māori Trust Board, who's one of our researchers and an integral part of our Moana Project mahi. So the Moana Project aims to revolutionise ocean forecasting for New Zealand's marine economy, and it's an MB Endeavour funded project, 5 years long, and led by the Met Services Oceanography Division called Met Ocean Solutions. And there are actually 62 researchers working over 29 organisations on the project, with Fakatori being our iwi partner. And they have a key role within our marine economy, so they make an ideal case study for the project. Rangihurihia mentioned being part of He Papa Moana, which is the team in the centre. So the project's kind of broken into 4 different groups, with each with their own research aims. Te Tiro Moana is the eyes on the sea, so they're looking at increasing our ocean observations and access to that data. Ngā Ripo o Te Moana are looking at the ocean currents and developing an ocean modelling system for New Zealand. And He Hono Moana, meaning the connectivity of the ocean, are looking at the connectivity of some of our key marine species, including our mussels across New Zealand. And we've got He Papa Moana sitting in the centre because He Papa Moana is our seafloor, or our foundation, our ocean knowledge foundation, our mātauranga. So the case study sits within He Papa Moana because it brings together the information from the rest of the project to understand impacts on iwi interests. Rangihurihia talked about iwi interests in the form of waka-voyaging and marae, and I'll talk a bit more about our whakatohia interests next. I just wanted to point out that we're using a transdisciplinary research approach based on the Wakataurua co-management framework. A Wakataurua is slightly different to a Wakahaurua, which is a one entity for ocean voyaging. This is a more coastal waka that is 2 waka that come together to achieve a common purpose. So they're actually 2 separate entities to come together. I'm happy to talk about that more, but don't have time right now. So the Fakatoria case study, if you're not sure who Fakatoria are, we're based in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, centred around Opotiki, and our area of interest for treaty settlement is between Marae Tōtara Stream in the west and Te Rangi, where the Nukutere waka landed in the east, and then up and around Whakaari White Island. And I want to acknowledge that we have overlapping interests with our neighbours. We're in the Bay of Plenty, so we're in a semicircle, so naturally they're all going to overlap at one point. But of course, we also have genealogical connections, and we manaki one another, so we always allow each other, not always, we allow each other to connect across the bay to share in the bounty of the bay. So the research aims within the case study are looking at what does the rohe moana consist of, the biophysical character, and also what are the whakatohia interests in the rohe moana, or the values. And these will be brought together in a whakatohia moana plan. I reviewed iwi management plans, and we're, as a nation of iwi, indigenising our plans by structuring them by atua and having them being Māori focused. And I could see sort of 3 key main areas of our plans, and the interests that we're describing today sit in the front of, or the foundation area of the plan, as well as the information on the physical and biological environment, which will come through from the wider Moana Project team. And then our mātauranga can also help to address issues, inform our actions and our indicators for the plan. So looking at our mātauranga in the form of a pātere. A pātere is a chant that describes some of our historical events that have happened to our ancestors. And on the left here, we have our eponymous ancestor of Fakatori Muriwai, who arrived on the Mātatua Waka. So she's sort of our starting point as an iwi. And we actually take our name from her tenacious and stubborn personality. So her story is the foundation of our Whakatohia Moana plan. And the pātere is known as Te Tapu o Muriwai. So it talks about a rāhui that was put across the Bay of Plenty as a result of the drowning of her two sons, in respect for that loss. So this pātere, I also refer to it as maruhiatu, which are the first two words of the pātere, was taught to some of our now iwi leaders by Sir Monita Delamere in the 1990s. One of these leaders being Dr. Kimberley Maxwell, who is the leader of the Opotiki Mai Tawhiti Kapahaka team, and I happen to be one of the little tamariki with my ears open, listening and learning alongside this pātere, which has been taught to hundreds of Whakatohia descendants since then. And just to get a taste of how it sounds when we're in full mode, it's quite an...
Ko Pōtiki mai tawhiti, ki nā whakataetae a motu.
That's what our pātere sounds like. See if I can remember how to get back to the presentation. Now we can have a look at some of the mātauranga within it. It's such a rich form of mātauranga. So within this pātere, we have knowledge around our history as Whakatohia, our sites of significance to us, our important species, our tikanga, our practices that we have associated with the moana. It's got our environmental knowledge and our indicators in there, and some of our morals. And it's such an important, amazing way to pass on our knowledge to our next generation. And you can kind of see that I've put the sites on this map that are referred to within the pātere. And an example, when you hover over the sites, they show information about the particular site. So Whakaari is one of our indicators of the weather in the Bay of Plenty. And this is the rāhui area that was put on after the drowning of Muriwai's two sons. So you can kind of see it's in the shape of a waka, but also the name of the pātere itself, or the starting maruhiatu, means to shield or shelter. And for me, this is a good reflection of what the plan aims to do for us as an iwi in terms of looking after our moana. I also wanted to refer to the mussels within the pātere. They're described within the pātere as ngā tamahine a te whakatohia. And I'll get Kaho to sort of explain what that means for us as an iwi.
Tipu au I ngā tamahine o te whakatohia. O ke mai koe ki o hiwa ki te tamahine a te whakatohea e noho rā I te wai kou o tō tipuna o tai tūtia. Tēnā kōrero tēnā. Ngā tamahine o te whakatohea. Ko ngā pipi wera. Ko ngā tuangi wera. o ngā kuku wera. Tēnā kupu whakarite ngā tama.
Kia ora, te kahoutou. So I guess what I'm trying to emphasize there is that for us, the kuku, the pipi, the cockles, they're just as important to us as the daughters of Fakatori. They are the daughters of Fakatori. We hold them in that level of esteem. So they're highly valuable to us. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about retaining sovereignty as an iwi when mapping ngā tauranga. So Fakatori connected to Takiwa, and they have a digital platform, so it's password protected GIS space where you can create your layers and only give access to particular people, and also you can access other databases as information comes available when you want to work on something without having open access. And then when information moves into the open access space, we're also working on developing traditional knowledge and biocultural labels, such as these labels here, that explain our protocols associated with the knowledge. For example, that this pātere is only to be used by Fakatori descendants and with the approval of the taumata kaumātua of Fakatori. And these labels then become attached to this data, so when it goes out, you always know that this is a Fakatori pātere data set. And I just wanted to put a plug out there for ngā Pautama Mata Whenua. Lynn's have developed a practical Māori GIS mapping one, which is starting next week. Dwayne Wilkins is starting that, if you want to take a look there. So for me, the plan is about focusing on that big picture and keeping us all connected. As our whakatauki here explains, e roi te whakatohea I te roa tini rau, whakatohea united by kinship. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Awesome, thank you, Kimberly. That was super interesting. What a cool study site. I haven't spent a lot of time up there, but it sounds like it's pretty diverse and interesting. There's a few questions. One's from me. How long was the rahui in place for?
That's a good question. So that rahui, I'm not sure because I'm getting mixed up with another rahui as well at the same time. Yeah, but it's a lot longer than 3 days, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Yeah,
just another question. Is there any historic knowledge out there about whakaari changing the ecosystem as it sort of undergoes, eruptions through time or anything like that?
I guess that would be quite a pertinent topic. I know that Kura was out there recently, so maybe she'd have some more information about that than I do. Take a deep dive into the bay with Kura just now.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And one more. At the start of your talk, you mentioned an iwi marine plan. Can you apply that to other rahui around, roho around New Zealand? Or is it just specific to that region?
Well, taking Mataron as the foundation to a marine plan could happen for any iwi nation or any nation that chooses to.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's that's it. Thank you so much for participating today. It was cool to hear about your research. Our third speaker is Kura Paul-Burke, who is a Maori marine researcher at the University of Waikato. She is a project leader for the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge and a marine kaitiaki for her iwi. Kura has extensive pragmatic experience combining Mataranga, Māori and Western science to assist kaitiaki tanga priorities of coastal Māori entities. Today, she's going to talk to us about Taura Whiri, creating biotechnological resources to assist shellfish restoration and reduce microplastic pollution in a soft bottom harbour. Over to you, Kura.
Kia ora tata, I'm hoping you can see my screen there. He mihi mahana tēnei ki a koutou, rau rangatira mākua tau mai nei. Ko whakari, ko motohora, ko rurima, ko motunau, ko motiti oku mautere, ko Ngāti Awa me Ngāti Whakehemo oku maunga, aroha mai, oku iwi, ko kura tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone, my whakapapa, my genealogical connections, I can't say that, connects me with the islands of Whakaari or White Island, who Kimberly was just speaking about, Motohora or Whale Island, the Rurima Islets, Motunau and Motiti, all of which are located in the Bay of Plenty region. I am from Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Whakehemo, and as already stated, I'm a marine researcher here at Te Whare Wānanga or Waikato. I would like to share with you just a small part of a Mataron Māori-led project that we have co-developed with our iwi partners over many years actually, and it's part of a Sustainable Seas project in Ohiwa Harbour. Ohiwa is just around the corner and actually is part of the rohe that Kimberly was just talking about. Should have had an arrow there, Kimberly, so we could point to it, but here we are, no. So it's in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and the title here on this slide says Taura Whiri, and Taura Whiri are traditional woven cords or woven ropes, if you like. And so we're going to talk about natural resource mussel spat lines. Those mussels in that image there come from Ohiwa Harbour. Okay, so and this is an image here of Ohiwa Harbour. This little, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, my arrow, but in the background there you can see that's Motohora, one of the islands to which I whakapapa to, and way over here is Whakaari, which Kimberly and I are both descendants from. So many of you will be aware that across Aotearoa, New Zealand, shellfish have and are significantly declining and remain vulnerable to a range of pressures, including legacy impacts, predation, and plastic pollution. So this presentation provides an overview of a practical Mātauranga Māori-led research project in the harbour of Ohiwa. And the project identifies and uses traditional plant bio-waste to create our natural resource Taura Whiri mussel spat lines. And the reason we are doing that, as I'm about to go into, is not only to look at ways to rejuvenate our mussel populations, but also to reduce microplastic pollution in our harbour, in our kaimoana, and most importantly, in our mokopuna. So, but let's go back for 2 seconds with this one slide. In this slide here is an image of Costinasterius muricata, apologies for my pronunciation if I have that incorrect, or Pātangaro, the 11-armed sea star. This image was taken on the eastern side of the harbour, the Upokarehe side of the harbour by Kutarere, and as you can see, there are way too many sea stars in that pipi bed. That pipi bed was approximately 2 hectares, and research from out of Australia has identified that a sustainable number of sea stars per hectare in the shellfish bed is around 15. That's 15 sea stars in a bed. Excuse me. That bed there had 50,000 per hectare. So the two hectare pipi bed had an estimated 100,000 sea stars in that bed. We have a huge issue in Ohiwa Harbour over the prolific overabundance of sea stars predating on our shellfish. In 2007, we had an estimated 112 million mussels, kuku or kutai, in a one bed, which was just under 2 kilometers in length. It was a continuous reef. However, fast forward to 2019, and we have only 80,000 mussels, or an estimated 80,000 mussels left in the harbour. In 2007, we mapped the traditional beds using Tauranga Māori as a premise, and we did that with our kaumātua from the different iwi entities. And by 2016, we had identified that there were 4 traditional beds in the harbour. Unfortunately, of the 4 traditional beds from many that have sustained many generations, only 1 remains today. So with our whānau, with our iwi partners, we part of a bigger project. The smaller project was looking, can we grow our own mussels in our harbour, from our harbour, for our harbour? And if we did, what would that even look like? How do you do that? So what we wanted to know also was, can mussel spat lines, if we were to put out mussel spat lines, mussel lines in the harbour, could we collect and grow mussels on them? And also, if we were to do that, if we were to maybe set up a little aquaculture system, could we relocate mussels? I'm sorry, I'm moving this around. Could we relocate mussels from the lines to the last remaining traditional bed in the harbour, which is that little orange oblong? I hope you can see my arrow. That's where the remaining bed is today. And ultimately, what are options for assisting shellfish recovery? So these here, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, are where we establish mussel restoration stations. Which is the image down the bottom here. That's what it looks like on the surface. So with these stations here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, those stations were set up in the harbour based on where traditional mussel beds used to be, and when we first mapped them in 2007. The image on the bottom with all those floats, the big red floats are just the anchor floats, and they have 250 kg train wheels underneath them because the currents are significant in this harbour. And those little orange floats in between, these ones here, underneath those are our mussel spat lines. But before we think about putting mussel lines in the harbour, there was just one thing we wanted to talk about. Did you know that there's an estimated 80 million tonnes of plastic which ends up in our ocean every year? On this slide here, I just did these images here on the left took me approximately 3 minutes to find in a Google search. Microplastic pollution in our kaimoana is a global issue. It's not restricted to Aotearoa, and it's not new. So if we're going to talk about setting up mussel lines in the harbour, it was really important to understand that commercial industry lines are really good at growing mussels, but they are also plastic based. So I thought, why don't we try using natural materials to see if mussel spat will attach on, grow on them, and at the same time be kinder to our environment. I then contacted Whaia Ruka Ngarimu Cameron from Te Whānau Apanui. She is a master weaver who understands the properties of natural materials. And she thought te koka or cabbage tree would be a good material for us to try, as opposed to using plastic based industry lines. So image 1 there is a picture of te koka or cabbage tree. I know almost all of you would have seen that before. And underneath you'll see this brown here. These are the dead or dying fronds or leaves or blades from the cabbage tree. Over time, they fall to the ground. So for bio-waste, rather than harvesting fresh materials, I just went walking in the wetland across from my house and picked up all the dead leaves from the cabbage trees and took them home. You know, these are the same leaves that get stuck in these types of things like palm fronds that get stuck in your lawnmower and wreck the blades, those things. So we found a use for them. So what we did there was that we gathered up all our bio waste, and image number 2 is of a wānanga we held at the marae at Hawaii, Te Whānau Apanui, Whaiaruka, the amazing Whaiaruka is this lady here, and we co-developed everything. We walked in thinking, with, I'm not sure what this is going to look like, and working with our iwi weavers, many of them tauira or students from Te Whare Wānanga o Aotearoa, we co-designed our tauranga or natural resource spat lines. Number 3 is an image of our advisory group, Te Rōpū Kairangahau for Ohiwa Harbour, which consists of iwi representatives from the main kaitiaki of Upukorehe and Ngāti Awa that we work with. Image 4, if we're going to put natural spat lines in the water, could we put in a natural float as well? So number 4 is a picture of faux or New Zealand corkwood, but and there I'm halfway through stripping the bark off it, but we've realised that our faux was not big enough and it just actually sunk. We also explored other plants such as number 6, that's nene, the brown, this here. This is nene, and this has actually come up from Te Waipounamu, because our nene up here in the North Island is a lot smaller. Nene has waterproofing properties. And so what nene does way back in the day is our tipuna, our ancestors, used to use nene to weave their raincoats and to put as the last remaining, one of the last fibres that they would put on their whare, because to help keep the rain out. And image number 5 is an image of new recruit mussels on our spat lines. So these here are our weavers, and just last month, actually just under a month ago, we made our spat lines, and then we took some of our weavers out on the boat to deploy their natural resource lines into the water at our mussel restoration stations. Over here, the image over here, this is what industry mussel spat lines look like. They're really bushy and hairy, which is a great thing. Like, they really are great at catching and growing mussels, because mussels can hide in there and you can have a huge proliferation of mussel growth. So what we did was we tried to emulate their lines, as you can see in this image over here. Using a variety of materials. And I'm actually sorry, I was a little bit lost for words, because these wahine, this is the wahine in the photo, they were just amazing women. This is all done voluntary, all of us, before we managed to get funding. So for 13 years, we have been working in Ohiwa Harbour, and for at least 10 of them, all of us have been voluntary. Money doesn't stop your heart from helping your harbour. So all these days, and we took them out on the harbour to deploy their lines to help assist mussel rejuvenation. So these images here, the image here of this float, when we went to go check on our first, these are our second generation lines. We did this again last year. And when we went, we were really worried because we couldn't see where our floats and thought we had lost them. As we got closer to our stations, we realized that we had had a super successful recruitment event, which means we managed to grow lots and lots of mussels, so many so that they actually colonized our floats and sunk them underwater. Yay, we can grow mussels in our harbour. And up here, this image here, I don't know if you can see this little tiny pink round bubble thing. That's the beginning of our baby mussels from Ohiwa, in Ohiwa, for Ohiwa. And these other images are just of other mussels growing on our lines with Cossinasterius muricata. We still have a huge issue with sea stars. So we're trying to grow the mussels on the lines to keep mussels in our harbour, to clean our harbour, while we try to figure out what to do with the bottom. Just about 3 weeks ago, we went back to our stations and we thought, what if we were to take one line from each of the stations and then relocate mussels to the last remaining traditional bed in the harbour? And that's what we did. These two young ladies down here, this was their weekend. They're both high school students from Ngāti Awa. They both attend Whakatane High School. Both of these taiohi or youth have been working with us for a number of months now, and they come out, they work really hard and are learning as they go, and they get a really cool lunch. But just like us, they're voluntary. Actually, but both of them have just picked up scholarships and will be attending university next year as first-year Māori marine science students. Our lines are regenerative. We have mixed sizes in this image here, and we know how long our lines will last in the water. We know on average how much they and the yield that they may or may not grow, depending on their thickness as well. The greatest news is this image up here with the sea star, is that we have just discovered that we have 3 new early stage mussel beds, all of which are growing in close proximity to our mussel stations. So for us, in the mahi that we're doing, it's about finding ways for Mātauranga Māori to be recognised and enabled to stand on its own merit as its own body of knowledge, which it is. And it's about promoting the practical transmission of localised, place-based, intergenerational knowledge, which is born through multiple generations and lifetimes of connectivity and kaitiakitanga. And for that, to assist and enable us all to better understand and care for our world and its environments for present and future generations. The lady in this image is called Te Aroha. She is one of the weavers from Te Wharewananga or Aotearoa. And it actually makes me emotional looking at this photo. Hang on, wait. Te Aroha she was so proud that the work that she had done was going to help her harbour and her babies into the future. Oh, wait, she should laugh if she knew I got emotional about her. But I think that image there sums up the feeling for all of our iwi partners and our team. That was just before we deployed her harbour into her line into the harbour. That image there is of our bio-waste Te Koka line, and the hand there is Whaiaruka Ngarimu Cameron's hand, because she was being our hand model. But Indigenous culture, like, did you know that in 2014, the World Wildlife Foundation released a report which identified that areas in the world where Indigenous languages have been retained and spoken are also the areas with the highest biodiversity. Cultural diversity is related to biodiversity, and both are important for improving the sustainability of the world's ecological systems. Kia ora.
Kia ora, that was such a good talk. Thank you so much. Really interesting, and a bunch of questions that have come in actually. One of them is, kia ora kura, what material has turned out to be the best for weaving your lines?
Well, we actually found that Te Koka, the bio-waste that we picked off the ground, ended up lasting the longest in the harbour. It has a history for many Māori, and they've used it over many generations for lots of things. So today, Te Koka is, but we have other lines just gone into the water, and we'll see how that goes as well.
Oh, awesome stuff. Was the mussel mortality and loss of the traditional beds due to sea star predation, or was it attributed to a different cause?
Sea star predation is prolific, and there are other sources, of course. We have sedimentation issues like most of the harbours and estuaries in the country, but we had an 8-year rahui over Ohiwa Harbour, and in that time, and prior to that, the first assumption was that it was over harvesting, our greedy selves taking too many mussels, but the rahui actually eliminated human predation as one of the variables. So the sea stars are thought to be the main cause. Yeah.
Are there any plans to remove, are there any initiatives out there for people to go in there and physically remove sea stars from the environment?
That is a topic that's arisen many times, because we work with 4 iwi partners, Te Fakatori, Upokarihe, Ngatiawa and Waimanakaku Tūhoe, as well as the 3 councils. We have a great relationship, all of us working together, and removing the sea stars has arisen many times. And I've been the handbrake, I'll have to say, because sea stars, this particular species is native to Aotearoa. So they're meant to be here. So if and they have their own Māori as well. They have their own mana as a species in our harbour, and they're also a keystone species. So, they're amazing critters who are eating all our shellfish. So if we were to remove sea stars, what would we do with them? Our project is, as I mentioned before, largely voluntary. So would we just throw them away? Because they have mana and Māori. So we have a plan. We've submitted a funding application to see that if we were to remove sea stars, could we turn them into a bioproduct? So our theme is always zero waste, zero impact. So no one can remove any sea stars until we can figure out maybe we should all eat them.
Yeah, awesome. Good luck with that plan.
Kimberly's like, swipe no.
So glad to see this work is continuing. This is from Mark Wilcox. Fantastic to see an environmentally friendly solution to harvesting spat for restoration. Wondering if any work has been done to determine why the sea star populations have exploded. I guess you kind of answered that in the first one.
Well, firstly, kia ora, Mark. Great to hear from you. We actually have a PhD student who has just started, and her PhD is looking at why there's so many sea stars. But she can't answer that question. It's a huge, complex question. But Mark, we should catch up and have this conversation. Be great.
Awesome. All right, I'll go to one more question. How do you ensure starfish are not grazing on the newly established mussel farms? Are the lines inaccessible from the seafloor?
Great question. Yes, they are. So because it's such a shallow harbour, our longest line is only 2 meters long, and we've had to measure them to make sure that at low tide they don't touch the bottom. But one of the stations, Station 3, had so many mussels that weighed down not only the floats but also the lines that actually did touch the bottom, and then sea stars were all over it. So yes, we have to measure stuff.
Yeah, unreal. What an awesome success story. Thank you for telling us about it. I think we'll let you off the hook and go to our next speaker, which is Phil Ross, who is a lecturer and researcher at the University of Waikato. His research is focused on past and present human impacts on the environment, and the notion that knowledge of human-environment interactions will guide the sustainable use of natural resources. His talk is entitled, Ask Not What Mataranga Can Do For You, ... Over to you, Phil.
You're on mute, Phil.
What a techno peasant. Can you hear me now? Tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā te mihi kia koutou mō tō manaki kia hau I tēnei hui. Ko mangawhau tōku maunga, ko watamata tōku moana, no tamaki makauro ahau, ko tauranga tōku kainga anainei, ko Ngāti Pakeha tōku iwi, ko Ross tōku whānau, ko Phil Ross tōku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So hopefully what you've picked up from my pepeha is that I grew up in central Auckland, in Epsom, just over the brow of Mount Eden, Mangawhau here. And so that was a real white sort of suburb, didn't have any Māori families living around me, went to primary school, didn't have any Māori friends there, went to Auckland Grammar, didn't play rugby, so didn't kind of hang out with the Māori kids playing sport. And then went to university, got into marine science, which again was a very sort of Pakeha dominated field. And so for a bit of evidence of that, what I thought I'd throw up is this photo of the rock stars of the Lee Marine Lab back in the 1980s. And while you can see that there's this amazing diversity of classic 70s haircuts, there actually isn't a lot of cultural diversity. So if you fast forward 20 years to when I was at Lee, what you can see is that you've got much better haircuts, but again, underneath all the white face, it's still just white faces. So not much cultural diversity. So what I was trying to get across there is the fact that, so I've grown up with very little exposure to Māori people, Māori culture, Mataron Maori. So I'm not an expert in Matauranga, not a practitioner of Matauranga. So given this is a webinar on Matauranga, you might be sitting there going, why are we sitting here listening to Phil? And it's a really good question. And I think possibly one of the answers is because, sort of a few years ago when I started trying to incorporate Matauranga into my work, I was probably one of the few Pākehā researchers trying to do that. And not saying I did it well or successfully, but I was kind of giving it a go. So things are changing a bit now. At last year's Marine Science Conference down in Dunedin, pretty much every single talk just about finished with, what are we going to do next? We're going to try and incorporate Matauranga into our research, which is really great to hear. But when I started going and talking to people, it was quite clear that a lot of people kind of didn't know what Matauranga was, or really how to go about incorporating it. But they knew it was a good idea. So I guess what I want to do today is kind of take you a little bit on some of my journey, and hopefully share some of the things that I've learned, and hopefully that can help some of the people listening, and maybe help communicate that to their students and sort of people coming behind them. So what I want to do is talk about, I guess this is all from my perspective, what Matauranga Māori is, why it's important in my research, and then how you can go about incorporating it into your research. So what is Matauranga Māori? So what really helped me here was when I sort of stepped forward and said, what is science? I'm a scientist, but I've never actually thought about what science is. So I went to the Oracle of all knowledge, Google, and realized that, and sort of found that science is a body of knowledge, and it's a process of acquiring that knowledge. And that process is the study of the world through observation and experimentation. Another definition, discovering what's in our universe, how things work. And I guess the way I like to think of it is pretty much figuring out all the things we need to survive and thrive and do all the amazing things that we do. So science has origins, or modern or Western science has origins in the sort of 1500s. Started off with Copernicus. His work on the stars was sort of deemed to be the beginning of the scientific revolution. And then behind him came all these amazing people, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, Einstein, Darwin, and they did all these, found out all these amazing things that we still use today. And so I kind of don't like the term Western science. I've kind of started using academic science or academic scientific knowledge, and that's appropriate. Most of us are trained in universities or work in universities, and that kind of, our expertise is kind of compartmentalized in these departments or silos, and for some reason we find it pretty difficult to talk to each other. And that's why we set up all these sort of research institutes. So science is only 500 years old, but clearly for thousands or tens of thousands of years before that, people have needed to understand the environment and how to survive in it. If you're a hunter, you needed to figure out where and when to find your prey. You needed the technology to be able to capture it or kill it. You needed to understand biology. Where are you going to stick your spear so that this big mammoth doesn't stick its tusks through you? If you're a health practitioner, you needed to understand the properties of plants if you're going to have a shot of making people healthy or even not kill them. If you're a navigator, a sailor, you needed to understand the stars. If you're a fisherman, so this is something we can relate to, you need to understand the behavior of fish, the distribution. You have to have this technology, and so this is all really, this knowledge didn't come out of nowhere. It's knowledge that's been developed through observation, experimentation over generations, tens, hundreds, thousands of years. So if we go back to our definition of science, being this body of knowledge that's acquired through observation and experimentation. In this case, experience over a long time. Indigenous knowledge is science. Tauranga Māori is the Indigenous knowledge of New Zealand. It's science. So that was kind of the sort of first thing that really helped me. While there's a lot of similarities, there's also a lot of differences between academic knowledge and Tauranga. I'm just going to talk about two of them that have been important for me. One is that Tauranga is place-based. Academic science, we tend to try and discover these sort of universal theories that we can apply everywhere. But I guess my understanding of Tauranga is that it's place-based, figuring out the information you need to survive and thrive in the place where you live. And if you go somewhere else, there's no guarantee that, or there's no expectation that that knowledge will be equally applicable somewhere, but it may be the basis for developing new Tauranga in that place. And then probably for me, the most important difference is that in academic science, we treat humans as being outside of the ecosystem, whereas in most Indigenous knowledge systems, humans are part of the environment. So this hasn't happened by accident. When I guess science was being developed 500 years ago, we decided that humans had to sit outside of the environment. We had to be the impartial observer, looking in on the environment so that our observations weren't biased by us. And so this contrasts with Tauranga, where humans are seen as part of the ecosystem. The environment influences us, the way we live, and what we do influences the environment, and just kind of going round and round and round. And so this is really important, because when we're talking about, today we're talking about managing the environment, what we're actually talking about is managing people. And if we don't understand people and what drives their behavior and see them as part of the environment, it's going to be very hard to come up with solutions that actually work. So why, for me, why is Tauranga important in my science? And I guess two reasons I'm going to talk about today. One, to get things right, and two, to provide context. So many of you will know that I work on tōhiro. I've talked about them lots in the past. My video stopped. There you go. So when I started working on tōhiro, the most charismatic of all New Zealand's marine organisms, even more charismatic than dolphins, I was using some genetics to try and look at this weird distribution of tōhiro and figure out what was going on. So I came up with this wacky idea that maybe Māori had taken tōhiro from the north and translocated them down to the south. So I thought about this idea, talked about it at a conference, and really didn't get a very positive response to this idea. There's questions whether Māori would have had the technology or the motivation or the know-how. So that was fine. So I thought I'd go and talk to some people who might know about this. So I spent a couple of years drinking cups of tea, talking to lots of people, and found out about a whole lot of tōhiro translocations, and not just tōhiro, but a whole range of other species. Some of the knowledge or translocations were from a long time ago, and so the details were a little bit hazy. Other translocations were happening, in the recent past or even still ongoing. So absolutely, tōhiro have been translocated around New Zealand. Academic science is wrong. Tauranga was right. Looking at the distribution of tōhiro. So this is, I've kind of, on this map here, I've kind of put a bit of a blue smudge, which is kind of the typical place where you'll find a tōhiro bed on a beach in northern New Zealand. Really different to the ecology of tōhiro down in the south. But yeah, it's very much kind of this sort of middle intertidal. And when we go to the Bible, to the cookbook, look at the description of tōhiro. They live in the mid intertidal to low intertidal, and possibly down to the shallow subtidal. So that's cool. Except when I went and talked to all these experts in tōhiro from around New Zealand, and every single area I visited, there was always people telling me, no, tōhiro occur in the subtidal, and not just in the shallow subtidal, but way out in the deep subtidal, out on that kind of back surf bar. So again, what we know from academic science about the ecology is wrong, and we can kind of take that information from Mataron to correct the record. Context. So if you're going to go and talk about Mataronga, drink lots of cups of tea with old people and get regaled with awesome stories, you're going to learn a lot about history. And history is really important. It explains kind of why we are where we are today. And I didn't used to be interested in history at all, but now really my favorite part of my job is going and having chats with old people and hearing awesome stories. In science, we don't seem to be very good at history, which is a shame. So to provide some evidence of that, when I started talking about translocation in Toheroa, in academic circles, not a lot of support for the idea. But when I go back and look at kind of historical newspaper clippings, find that in the 1920s and 30s, the Fisheries Department, which is the precursor to MPI, Fisheries New Zealand, actually was involved in doing lots of translocations of Toheroa. But that kind of institutional knowledge has been lost, and therefore today, fisheries managers are managing Toheroa without that kind of context of what was done in the past. History is important. So next thing I was going to do was talk about how to incorporate Mataronga into your science. But I'm not going to do that. That's something you're going to have to figure out for yourself. But what I want to finish with is this. Ask not what Mataronga Māori can do for you and for your research, but what your research can do for Mataronga Māori. So when I first went and started trying to unravel this mystery of the strange distribution of the Toheroa, I'd go and I'd sit down with people, and pretty much the situation was me saying, hey, can you give me your knowledge so I can go and answer this academic question, which is interesting to me, but is really not necessarily going to benefit you in any way. And pretty quickly I realized that this was a not great situation. And there was no reciprocity. I didn't have anything to offer in return for that special knowledge. And so I kind of changed my tack to more of a, hey, this is what I'm interested in doing, but what can I do for you and your whānau? So a lot of the time, didn't necessarily sort of figure out what I could do to start with. Sometimes the help that was needed was not something that I could provide. But eventually we started to figure out some things that we could do together. And so, for example, I've helped different hapu and iwi with preparing customary fisheries research fund applications, run kind of educational stuff for tamariki in different places, gone to Wellington and kind of advocated on behalf of these communities. I think some people in MPI think I'm a bit of a pain in the ass, but that's okay, I am. And then probably my favorite thing is painting Hui Marae with my friend Justin. So I've kind of got to the situation now where rather than me having to go to these communities and say, this is what I want to do, give me your knowledge, I've got a few projects starting to happen now where people are coming to me and saying, hey, we've got the Mataronga sorted, can you come and help us with the science? And so I guess that's moved me from a situation as being someone who's going in to try and extract Mataronga and sort of not feeling entirely comfortable with it, to being able to go and be a provider, to go and work with these experts in Mataronga and work together to solve a problem. So I guess if you want to incorporate Mataronga into your work, I'd say go and talk to your local Māori community, customary fisheries forum, say kia ora, drink some cups of tea, and figure out what problems there are that you can help solve. So with that, I'll just finish. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. That was my phone. I tried to turn it off.
Awesome, thanks Phil. That was super interesting and a really good lesson for us all, I think, to have the sort of equal weighting of both Mataronga Māori and science knowledge. Sadly, we don't have time for questions because we've run a smidge over time, but please, if anyone watching has got any questions for any of our panelists, by all means, contact them directly or send me an email and I can pass that on to them. I want to thank all our speakers today for talking about their research in this forum. It's been incredibly interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing or hearing more about this research in time. Next month, we have our 6th session, which is on marine invasive species and biosecurity. The session is full, so please register for that if you haven't already, and we will see you next month on the 19th of November. Thanks everyone. Kia ora.